Thanks. I'm just putting on a timer so I can. Just really quickly, my name is Tara Waters. I'm actually a practicing lawyer, but also I run a consultancy. Vals AI is a separate commercial company. I actually consult for them as their vLayer project lead, and I'll just tell you a little bit about that. Anyone wants to connect with me, that's my little QR code. Just quickly about Vals itself. So Vals is a San Francisco-based startup. It was born out of the research of a Stanford student called Ryan. He's the one seated here on the ground. He actually was studying and did some research on NLP evaluation in the healthcare sector in diagnosing diseases. And as he graduated relatively recently, the rise of LLMs happened. And so he looked at how he could adapt his research to the LLM space and created a company alongside one of his friends from Stanford. It's now a small team based out in San Fran. And they're actually industry agnostic. So they've got a number of benchmarks studies that look across a number of high value industries. Quite interestingly, though, they started with legal. And I can't remember who it was that said something to me or whether it came out of Y Combinator, but basically what someone said to me, the vibe in San Francisco and Silicon Valley right now is we have, the most brilliant minds in the world turning to AI, LLMs, the capabilities, and how they can use them to solve the world's most complex problems. And somehow and miraculously, a lot of them are turning their attention to the legal industry, which I think is really exciting. So for all of us here in the room that are thinking about AI and legal, consider yourselves amongst the most brilliant minds trying to solve the world's most complex problems. In terms of, and sorry, I think my fonts have gotten messed up. Vals itself, as I said, they're looking at the legal industry. They have 3 existing benchmarks. So they started out benchmarking specifically the underlying foundational models. So if you go to vals.ai, you can see the entire long list of benchmarks that they run. They were the first organization to put out specific legal benchmarks, Legal Bench, which was in collaboration with Stanford and others, taking a much more academic approach in terms of if you have a legal question, what's that IRAC model in terms of assessing. IRAC is what we learn in US law school, in particular, in order to pass the bar. As long as you follow IRAC, you will get enough points to pass the bar exam pretty much. So what's the issue? What's the rule? Apply the rule to the facts of the case study that's put in front of you, and what is then the outcome. Then they've moved on to contract law. And this really came about probably about a year ago when we had, as John showed, this growing proliferation of legal AI vendors. They were putting out marketing claims around the efficacy and accuracy of their platforms. They didn't necessarily jive with what people in the market were actually experiencing. And to be honest, some of those claims were like 100% hallucination free in small letters. Citations, for example. So, there was definitely a sense of, can we trust this marketing? How do we actually understand what these products can do? Then there was a very controversial study that came out of Stanford, actually a couple of studies, which first looked at some of the existing legal research providers in particular, noting that they actually had high hallucination rates, lower than the public models themselves, but still relatively high, especially in light of some of the marketing that was being stated about them. That was controversial for 2 main reasons. One was actually flagging up these hallucinations in light of what was being said by some of the vendors, but also the fact that the vendors were not aware of the evaluation going on. And in fact, in the first pre-publication of the report, there was an uproar because they used practical law as opposed to Westlaw. For those people that know, Westlaw is the primary law and regulation source from Thomson Reuters, whereas practical law is really market based. So that is not meant to be a primary research tool. And so they quickly got themselves access to Westlaw and were able to rerun it, but nonetheless actually still showed high hallucination rates. And then at the end of the day, you have the customers, law firms in particular, sitting there saying, what are we supposed to know? We're being pressured internally to somehow get Gen AI, but what are we supposed to really know about the capabilities of these tools? And that's really the birth of VLayer, which Vals then worked really closely in partnership with Legal Tech Hub, which again, John mentioned. Legal Tech Hub, for those of you who don't know, probably has the biggest finger on the pulse in terms of the global legal technology landscape, and provides a lot of services both to technology companies as well as law firms and customers. And so they were able, through their network, to put Vals in close contact with a number of top law firms in the US, as well as Cognia, which is an alternative legal services provider. And together, they put together this study, which was in particular, I think, to the points raised earlier, bringing together all of the main stakeholders that needed to be involved in a process like this. I met them after, in September, actually, after some of the initial work was done, and was brought on board as really the only active person in the team with any legal background to come in and help make sure the work got done on time. The methodology itself is really probably the most interesting bit for all of you, and it really was predicated on these 4 things. First of all, the data set had to be user defined. So the team talked to the law firms that were introduced, tried to understand in terms of what your own evaluations, when you're looking at products, when you're evaluating some of the products, what specific legal tasks are you testing to see the efficacy of? So they identified 8 tasks in total to actually to work on. And then in particular, 10 law firms from the AmLaw cohort ultimately provided the specific Q&A that were used. So they wrote not only the questions, but the golden source answer that was used to grade and judge the correctness of then the respondents' answers. The other key element was bringing the vendors into the loop. So there was an open call to vendors. A lot of people complained that they weren't invited. There was actually an open call, and we've done a number since then. We had 5 vendors sign up, and they specifically signed a letter of intent with the Vals team, and they were able to opt into each of those 8 tasks. So none of them were being evaluated with their knowledge, and they were able to say which tasks they felt comfortable having their product evaluated on. So there wasn't a single product that signed up to all tasks, for example. So there are some products, but they knew that they had limitations in terms of the capability. So that was really key. And the other key thing was that we gave them the option to withdraw at any time. And actually 3 firms exercised that right, but on the basis that we were allowed to publicize that they were involved in the study, and they chose to withdraw. We didn't make comments on the reasons for the withdrawal. They could withdraw from a single task, or they could withdraw from the study in its entirety. As the conversations went on in terms of designing the study overall, it became clear that one of the big questions in the customer's mind was, okay, well, how is this AI comparing to what my lawyers currently do, and what is it delivering in terms of value of, against what's happening currently? And so the decision was made to create the lawyer baseline. As I mentioned, we partnered up with Cognia Law. We made sure that in terms of the lawyers that they assigned the tasks to, that they selected lawyers with experience. So we had a group of transactional specific tasks, some litigation related tasks, and a couple of research related tasks. So if someone was a lifelong litigator, they were not asked to focus on redlining, of course, but they made sure that they doled out those questions in the right way. And those lawyers were able to seek to answer those questions using all the resources available to them, as long as it was not Gen AI. And then finally, Vals is actually a commercial company. They sell this offering. They have an automated evaluation platform that utilizes LLM as judge as the way in which answers are therefore graded. And they have an ability to set up for each question the appropriate analyses to actually provide an accuracy score for each question. And then human secondary checks were done for each 0 score to ensure there weren't any basically false negatives. So the results are a slightly different view from what John put. Oh, sorry, I'm kind of standing in front of the screen. The results ultimately showed that in 2 of the cases, the human baseline outperformed all of the tools. It matched it in 1, chronology generation, and then in all other cases, the AI tools actually outperformed the human baseline. I think in terms of a few comments to make around the evaluation process itself and why some of these results came up, I think pretty obvious and expected to see document Q&A as a task to be the highest scoring task. and to see a platform like, actually to see all the platforms perform so highly across that. That's, that's the simple chatbot RAG, upload a document, kind of table stakes now from a lot of our perspectives in terms of what you would expect any AI tool, much less legal AI tool, to be able to do. So that was, really a validation that you could upload several hundred pages documents, and the AI is very likely to find and discern the correct answer for you. Not quite as good on data extraction. Yeah, I think the pre-existing NLP and machine learning based tools have actually been quite successful in that market, and the generative tools are not necessarily as good as those, but still outperform the lawyers. I think the key thing with data extraction was some slight nuances in terms of locating specific text that LLMs struggled perhaps a bit more with, including term of arts. And there was actually quite a bit of LinkedIn posts about, for example, MFN provisions, most favored nation provisions, and how or why LLMs are good and not good at finding those. Looking at something like chronology generation, there was a little bit of variance in terms of the level of detail that, for example, the AI tools provided, keeping in mind we're judging against an answer that is provided by each of the law firms. So if the answer didn't contain sufficient detail that the law firm had included in terms of describing what each event was in that chronology, then there were dings in terms of the total overall score. And I think that represents kind of an overall theme, which was the AI tools are by design overly verbose, overly lawyerly in terms of that initial output, and it was a zero-shot prompt. So through the Vals system, it was actually done through APIs to each platform. The question was posed, and then we extracted the output as the answer, and that was what got graded. Versus, say, a lawyer who's actually going through an analysis and process in their mind. They find the information, they're actually refining it already in their mind. So they're going through a multi-shot prompting experience within their heads. So they were giving very concise and oftentimes mostly correct answers, but then sometimes slight nuance or detail was not included, which the AI tools had more of a chance of including because they kind of just gave you 5 paragraphs by default. They would not often just give you, if the answer was a date, they wouldn't just say the date, they would give you a date and then they'd give you 2 more paragraphs explaining why they selected that date. So, it was interesting to see, reasons for the variance. We did look also at latency. We did not calculate the speed of return of responses in the actual accuracy scores. We did get a lot of commentary on that. I mean, I think it's pretty clear that lawyers will take a lot more time to do something than an AI tool. The only reason I think Oliver is a little bit longer is it natively was using Llama, whereas all the other platforms were primarily using GPT-based models, and therefore, was going through a bit more of the reasoning flow, which is why it took a little bit longer, but ultimately pretty clear AI will be faster than people. And just to give you an example of how the evaluation went. So we had a question, this was under the transcript analysis task. So you fed it a several hundred page transcript. This one related to the Theranos investigation of Elizabeth Holmes. So pretty standard. Within a page, it'll list who's part of that particular meeting. So there it says, 3 lawyers representing the witness, which was Elizabeth. So if you ask the question, how many lawyers? If you flip to page 2, you might quickly say, oh, it's 3. But actually, once the meeting got started and everyone in the room was asked to confirm who they were there for and what they were doing there, it turned out that 2 of the company lawyers from WilmerHale identified themselves also being there representing Elizabeth in her capacity as CEO, not only in her personal capacity. So therefore, the answer is actually there are 5 lawyers there to represent Elizabeth. So the way that the Vals system scored that was what we did for each answer is we broke that down into component correct parts, and then each of those component parts were evaluated separately. So for each Q&A, it wasn't a 0 or a 1. It was often a percentage. So here, if the answer only identified those first 3, then you failed on 2 of them because you missed the total 5. You also missed the 2 Wilmer Hale lawyers. So ultimately, you only got a pass rate of 33.3. Ultimately how all of the questions were run. So it was not you either got a 0 or 100. It was often a range. And then in terms of just overall key learnings, I think ultimately, to be honest, we validated what we probably all suspected in terms of the hypotheses, right? Which is that there are certain legal tasks that AI is ready, able to be used to the advantage of any lawyer. And by all means, you should feel comfortable and confident in using those types of tasks. But of course, on the flip side, we identified there are also tasks that require a lot of nuance, multi-step thinking or strategies around how to actually respond. That in particular, if you're thinking about using these tools in a 0 one-shot prompt environment, you're not necessarily going to get reliable answers out of, and so you're going to need to continue to have lawyers involved. And then clearly in terms of speed, that's an obvious thing. To be honest, and this is a personal statement, and I've queried audiences as I've spoken over the past year, there was a lot of noise and commentary around people are going to be willing to sacrifice quality and accuracy for speed. I don't think that's correct, because I think everyone, I think of course it's faster. So I don't think anyone's willing to sacrifice quality and accuracy for speed. Ultimately, I think they're willing to sacrifice quality and accuracy for the user experience of using the tool and being able to get to a client-ready output faster, but not pure speed. So from my perspective, I think that's, I think comments that suggest we should factor that into the overall score, I personally don't think makes a lot of sense, because if the AI isn't fast, at a minimum faster, then there's really no point in using it. And then just in terms of what's next, we're actually actively started our legal research task. So that was the 8th task. We're also, as John mentioned, we're exploring some new collaborations. We're trying to figure out how we can scale this across the world, because obviously the first study was US focused. And then we're also thinking about how do we scale that underlying study to make it repeatable, to allow more vendors to participate, keeping in mind that it is taking a lot of resources and time and money to conduct. And this is just the QR code if you actually want to get to the underlying study. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. And